Welcome back. We're ready for our second video of week 5, our second one in the New Testament. We've gotten the ministry of Jesus begun. It's time to distinguish. We're going to take in this one, the teachings of Jesus, and miracles are coming. Wow. Who's the best teacher you ever had? Boy, I hope that you have great memories of great teachers. And we can go all the way back. We're going to have this as one of our questions. Back to, elementary school. You could go on through maybe some college experiences. I've had great teachers. Well, not every teacher, of course, but I've had some wonderful teachers. And I'm going to use this as a chance to say that my 6th grade teacher, Mrs. Oschlager, was one of the best ever. She taught us the joy of life, the joy of school. She was just a wonderful young woman. It was her first class ever. She had a decades-long history of teaching in my little hometown of New York Mills, Minnesota. She was one of the best ever. I went to college at Morehead State University, Minnesota State University in Morehead. The head of the English department was a man named Clarence Glassrood, and he made me into an English major. I wasn't going to be an English major. Then I met Clarence Glassrood, and wow. I was so impressed with his teaching, with this man who could make what just were words on a page come alive, and what a kind man. But probably the best ever, Bruce Metzger. When I was in graduate school, I had a chance to meet Bruce Metzger, who by all accounts, in the late 20th century on into the early 21st century, was a giant among men in the theological world. But as wise as he was, as well-published as he was, as famous as he was the kindest man ever. He spoke in the kindest, simplest way. He was in the library every day, it seemed, and not just for his own sake, talking to students. What a great man. I hope you have great memories of great teachers who were able to hold people in the simplest ways, just by their enthusiasm, certainly by their knowledge, and their love of the subject. Go with that, and let's go to the teaching of Jesus. I think the teaching of Jesus is what we'd expect in some ways. That is, the teaching of Jesus comes to us in a greatness that looks like greatness. In this unit, we're going to focus on the Sermon on the Mount. Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7. This is the beginning in Matthew's presentation of Jesus, of his teaching. And it's greatness like we expect. That is, when he begins to teach, people sit and they listen. Not a word. If you have a red letter Bible, you'll notice that this is unbroken red for 3 chapters. There's no question. There's no debate. There's no interruption. Nobody gets up and leaves, it seems. They simply listen. And at the end, they are simply able to say, this man teaches with authority. Wow. I think that's the teaching we'd expect. So what do we hear Jesus do? Well, we start with things that you and I like to hear and that make sense to us. The Beatitudes. Blessed are. Matthew chapter 5, verse 3 and following, the early Beatitudes give us, what we expect. I mean, think about it. As you give, so you get. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Doesn't that make sense? Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. In other words, as you are, so it'll be returned to you. And I would expect that everybody was nodding their heads and saying, sounds good, makes sense. I've seen that. Boy, is there a sharp bend in the river in verses 10, 11, and 12. That's when Jesus says, blessed are you when you are persecuted, accused, treated. Terrible news. Wait a minute. Now that we've got a different thought, we've gone from as you are, so you return, to who do you want to be like? If you want to be like the prophets, in fact, if you want to be like me, then there's something different. It won't be a return of what you've given, you get back, but instead, as they treated them, so they'll treat you. And like will become like. As it was, so it is, now for you. Wow, what a bend in the river as we look to Jesus as the Messiah who goes ahead of us to set a course, a pretty daunting course, and says, follow me. After that, Jesus goes to a series of challenging words. Begins in chapter 5, and you might put this under the theme of forget what you know. That's an interesting teaching technique, isn't it? Sometimes you have to say to people, you know what you know? Forget that. Well, listen to Jesus saying that again and again and again and again in chapter 5. He says, you've heard it was said, And then he tells them what they've heard. You've heard it was said, do not murder. And you feel good about that. Well, I say to you, and he goes to something deeper. And the something deeper is persistently what's on the inside is what matters. You see, it's easy to feel good about ourselves on the outside. And take do not murder. I like that commandment. I bet you like it equally. Have you ever murdered someone? I'm sure you're right now saying, no. Do you plan to today? No, I'm not going to do that. I like that commandment. In fact, I should get a medal. I should get a t-shirt that says, I've never murdered anybody. And God says, I can see right through that medal. I can see right through that t-shirt. You've wanted to. If you could have gotten away with it, if you could have pinned it on somebody else, that would have been even better. I know what lurks within, and that's what matters. And so forget what you know or think you know. Oh, and he goes on even deeper. Forget what you know and think you know if eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. If imagining that somehow if I just give back to somebody perfectly equal to what they did to me, there'll be peace. That won't happen. There's no peace in simply returning eye for an eye, not in personal relationships. Jesus says the only way to stop that war that's going on, turn the other cheek, go that extra mile, give what they didn't even ask for. That's the only way. Now at that point, you're going to have to say, but who can do this? Who prays for their enemies? Who wants good for those who are persecuting them? Who can do this? I think that moment, we want to be in the chapter 5 moment with Jesus. We want to hear him say, you must be perfect. And we say, who can do that? And at that moment, have Jesus walk past you. And there's the answer. The answer is in the question itself. Ask the one who says these things, who does this? And look at him, because in the end, he's the answer. As good advice as this is, it's daunting, and none of us does it well. None of us does it perfectly, and none of us is going to be the perfect one. But look at him who says it. There's the perfect one who turns the other cheek, who gives far more than ever asked, who does what nobody expected. There's the answer. Well, that we get in chapter 5. Chapter 6 begins with, you might say, a simple theme, don't put on a show. Jesus is going to take on the Pharisees. The Pharisees are the leaders who were respected by many. The Pharisees were respected because, well, in an illiterate world, they could read. They had accumulated a body of knowledge, both of Old Testament and of the traditions, but they put on a show. And Jesus points them out. And he says, don't be like these people. Don't put on a show of prayers simply for others to see, of making an offering in such a way that others can see, of going about, with such a long, sad face because you're fasting. Well, nobody needs to know that, but the Pharisees make sure that you do. Don't be like these people. Don't put on a show with what you do. Instead, simply do it because a Father who sees in secret knows. That takes us to the end of chapter 6. Chapter 6 is great about worry. Why do you worry? He makes a great analogy, a comparison between the flowers, the lilies of the field, and us. Now, I went out this morning just before we started filming, and I cut down one of the flowers right out here at Concordia, and we're thinking it's a lily. Let's go with it that it is. Hey, I only cut this thing down maybe an hour ago at the very most. It's still looking good as it sits there in my water bottle. But how long is it going to last? Not long. I'm not sure it's going to make it through the end of the day looking very good. And it's sure not going to, fully develop all these little guys. But, that's the point Jesus makes. Look at the lilies. If God puts this much effort and care into a lily that outdresses Solomon, and yet here today, gone tomorrow, how about you? Hasn't he invested far, far more in you? Doesn't this, by the way, take us back to Genesis chapter 1, and we're made in the reflection of God? If God has invested in us that entire 6th day, and of us as reflections of himself, won't he care for us at least as much as he does this little flower that's here today and gone tomorrow? That's a wonderful theme. Stop worrying. So pray to the Father, Matthew chapter 7. He gives us those simple directions: ask, seek, knock. And he gives a great comparison. As a father knows to give good gifts to his children, so the Heavenly Father will give good things to those who ask him. It all boils down finally to the rock. We've had our friend the rock before. We talked about the rock as this theme of one in place of us all. And I think that really works here with the teaching of Jesus. He says in the end, you can build your house on either a sand or a rock foundation. You can build it on sand. And I want you to think about sand as the many pieces of shifting advice that you and I find in our world. There's many pieces of small sand-like particles of advice that you can try to stand on. The problem is, they keep moving. They keep changing. New ones come, old ones go. And when the storm hits, you're gone. Jesus holds himself up, one, in place of them all, the rock. He says there's one body of teaching, one truth, that's himself. It's a solid, unchanging rock. Now look, you put your life here. You settle down on this, and you'll be well. So there's the teaching of Jesus, the spellbinding teacher who holds us. I hope you had great experiences in school, wonderful teachers that we're going to be talking about in our questions, but especially that they are just a small reflection of this one spellbinding teacher.